Welcome to History Uncovered TV. Today, we're exploring one of the most unsettling stories in modern urban legend, the Russian sleep experiment. Imagine a scenario where sleep itself becomes the enemy, where deprivation drives people beyond the brink of sanity into madness. This story examines the extreme boundaries of the human mind under conditions so horrifying that many say this experiment was buried deep in Soviet archives, never meant to see the light of day. The year is 1947. The world is recovering from World War II, but a new battle for dominance begins: the Cold War. In this climate of secrecy and suspicion, Soviet researchers allegedly decided to test the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on 5 political prisoners. The promise was simple. If they could go 30 days without sleep, they would be granted their freedom. But, as we'll discover, there was a high price to pay for staying awake. Chapter 1: The Setup and Initial Days. The prisoners were placed in a sealed, airtight chamber to prevent any contamination with the outside world. This chamber was filled with a gas, an experimental stimulant designed to keep them awake indefinitely. The researchers monitored them closely through microphones, two-way mirrors, and tiny cameras. The prisoners themselves didn't know they were being watched, which added an extra layer of tension. At first, the experiment seemed uneventful. On days 1 through 3, the prisoners exhibited mild irritability and anxiety, which was expected. They spoke to each other and shared stories, unaware that their every move was being monitored. Their pacing and shuffling were considered normal responses to confinement. But by the 4th day, signs of paranoia and frustration began to show. They started whispering to themselves, as though hiding something even from the scientists. Chapter 2: Descent into Paranoia and Madness. By the 5th day, things took a disturbing turn. The prisoners started showing signs of intense paranoia, whispering conspiracy theories and dark thoughts to one another. Some began to think the gas was affecting them in strange ways, while others claimed they could hear voices outside the chamber, calling to them. As the days wore on, the prisoners' behavior became even more unpredictable. On the 9th day, the silence shattered. One of the prisoners began screaming uncontrollably, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. He sprinted from one end to the other, shrieking for hours until his voice was reduced to a hoarse whisper. Instead of responding, the other prisoners began ripping apart books and smearing pages with human waste. Some appeared to be engaging in self-harm, clawing at their own skin in frantic, almost ritualistic ways, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the screaming stopped. An eerie silence settled over the chamber, and days passed without a sound. Chapter 3: A Disturbing Discovery. By day 15, the researchers were deeply alarmed. Despite repeated attempts to communicate, the prisoners refused to answer. It was as if they had forgotten how to speak. The only sounds from the chamber were strange, soft whispers, unintelligible to the researchers. The lead scientist made the decision to open the chamber, fearing they might find everyone dead inside. As the chamber door opened, a horrifying sight awaited them. 4 of the prisoners were still alive, but barely recognizable as human. Their eyes were sunken, bodies severely emaciated, and their fingers bloody and raw. They had torn off large pieces of their own flesh and were eating them to survive. Bones and flesh littered the floor, and their expressions were hollow, devoid of all reason and humanity. When the scientists attempted to remove them, the prisoners resisted, screaming and begging to be left alone. One even attacked a soldier who entered the chamber, biting down with such force that he tore through bone. Their only demand: to remain in the chamber, to keep the gas on, to stay awake. Chapter 4: The Escape Attempt. In a desperate attempt to contain the situation, the researchers decided to sedate and restrain the remaining subjects. But even under sedation, their strength seemed abnormal. One broke free from his restraints and violently attacked a scientist, tearing at his face and shouting in a language none of them understood. It took 3 soldiers to finally restrain him. One prisoner, in a moment of clarity, said, "We must stay awake. The truth is clearer now." The researchers were at a loss. They questioned him further, and he whispered words that none could fully comprehend. "We have seen the darkness that lives within. It feeds on fear, on silence, on the emptiness of sleep. Another prisoner stared into the eyes of one scientist and declared, "We are the evil within. When you sleep, we wait for you." This statement left the scientists shaken to their core, realizing that these subjects seemed to believe they were embodying some primordial, universal darkness. Chapter 5: The Final Moments. Only one prisoner survived the experiment, barely clinging to life. Strapped to a hospital bed, he muttered continuously about the horrors he had seen in his mind, about the darkness that waited for humanity beyond the threshold of sleep. When a scientist asked why he had chosen not to sleep, his response was chilling. "I am what you fear when you close your eyes. I am the nightmare that lives inside you." With that final declaration, he drew his last breath, leaving the scientists with an unsettling question. Had they simply broken the mind of a man, or had they truly seen a glimpse of some unspeakable, dark force that only emerges in the absence of sleep? And so, was the Russian sleep experiment real or just an urban legend designed to disturb? Many argue that it's pure fiction, a grim reminder of the psychological and physical limits of human endurance. But here at History Uncovered TV, we know that even fictional stories often hold a kernel of truth. Regardless of its authenticity, the Russian sleep experiment reminds us of the risks humanity has taken in the name of science and control. It's a haunting reminder of what we may be capable of when driven to the edge. What do you think? Could this have been real? Or is it just a nightmare crafted to keep us awake?